Thank you everyone for joining us in tonight's Loksatta Hangout. Tonight we're going to talk about black money. We apologize for the delay in the start of this interaction today. We had some technical difficulties from various locations. There's lots of interest in this topic and a lot of discussion going on online and in the print and electronic media about it. So we thought we'll bring you this special edition this week to talk about black money and more importantly, what Loksatta thinks about this and how we can get rid of this menace from our country. So I'll introduce our panel today. We have the top leadership of Loksatta Party today, our founder and national chairman, Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan, our incoming national president, Srivastava, based in Mumbai, and Dr. Ashwin Mahesh, our national council member based in Bangalore. They'll be our speakers today, and we have several young people joining us from across the country to interact with them directly. So let me start with you, Dr. JP. You made some comments on Twitter recently that evoked a lot of response from netizens online about how do you actually know how much money is there, how much black money is there. You use some quotes, figures like $500 billion black money. And people like Mohandas Pai on Twitter are asking you, how do you get these numbers? What is your source?
Okay. First of all, Srinivas, nobody knows the number. What we know for sure is the very large numbers touted by some people like Baba Ramdev, for instance, before the election. They're all absurd. They were talking about trillions of dollars, 6 or 7 trillions of dollars, which is absurd. The best guess that we have is from the Global Financial Integrity. It's a global non-profit organization with a lot of professionalism. And they have done enormously painstaking studies, and they revealed all the methodologies and so on and so forth. Their assessment is up to 2008, about $462 billion of Indian money is stashed away abroad. But that includes a reasonable rate of interest. The actual money they came up with was $213 billion, and they added another $249 billion of interest on a reasonable interest rate on those sums. That came to 462 billion US dollars. They also came up with another number, and that is from 2001 to 2011. The average per annum outflows from India are about $34 billion. But what is, I think, disconcerting is, in recent years, the numbers seem to be rising substantially. The past 3-4 years, the numbers are more like 60 to 70 billion US dollars. So it is on the rise. But there are two caveats to these numbers. One is a substantial part of the money has come back to India as foreign direct investment, because if you notice the sources of FDI into India, Mauritius accounts for about 41%, and then Singapore accounts for 9%. Now, by no stretch of imagination can you assume that these two countries have large enough economies to invest such large sums in India. It is what they call double tripping, is it? Round tripping, I think. This is round tripping. That means the money is brought back by many means, but basically Indian money is stashed away abroad. So it's not that all the money stashed away abroad is staying there. The second thing is, it's not that all the money stashed away abroad is actually retained in bank accounts. Much of it is going in terms of real estate. You go and ask anybody in Dubai or some other city, people tell you so-and-so property belongs to so-and-so politician, so-and-so bureaucrat, or so-and-so entrepreneur in India, so on and so forth. It's all sort of now publicly known, though you can't prove it easily. Secondly, conspicuous consumption. A lot of luxury goods enjoyed abroad, or a lot of money is spent on those things. Third is they're also investing abroad in businesses, but by a very complicated means, so that you can't always go to the source. The other caveat is that this money does not include certain amount of outflows which are by criminal activities, the mafias and the narcotics, because they have their own hawala channels, and therefore you cannot really estimate those amounts. And the service sector, the under invoicing, etc., also is not accounted. But my guess is service sector under invoicing may not be a substantial amount. There may be some amount, but I don't think it's a substantial amount. So these are the caveats. Therefore, an amount of $400 to $500 billion, if you take all these into account, may not be a substantially wrong amount. But as I said, it's not necessarily in banks, and certainly not in Swiss banks. In Swiss banks, you probably don't have more than about 3% of this amount. I want this to be understood. It's a very
Yeah.
small amount. And in the Swiss banks itself, India's money is only 0.13% or thereabout of all the money in Swiss banks. So this notion that the money is in Swiss banks is a very popular misconception. Actually, there are many, many offshore tax havens. Money is stashed away there. So these are the sums. As I said, nobody knows the accurate numbers. We have to go by some professional agencies' reasonable estimates. And this is about the best estimate we can rely upon.
Thank you, Dr. J. Ashwin, where is all this coming from? It's 60 billion a year. It's increasing every year. Where is black money being generated in our economy? Where is all this coming from? What are the different places where it enters the mainstream of the economy?
There are two ways of thinking about this. The conventional understanding of black money is that there are different kinds of black money. There is black money from illegal activities, crime, drugs, the sale of goods and services that are prohibited in the country. So there's a certain amount of illegal activity that generates black money, and therefore that sort of floats around in the economy, either here in India or abroad. The second is there is an unreported economy. A lot of stuff happens that by law should be reported to the tax authorities and is not reported to the tax authorities for one reason or the other, and there's tax avoidance, which creates black money. The third is also false, and one version of that is the falsely reported economy. You buy a house, you don't disclose the full value of the house because it's convenient for both the buyer and the seller to report a different value, and that creates a third kind of money. The fourth is money that is created and sort of presumed to be black because the law forbids it in some way for a financial regulatory reason. What I mean by this is, so some countries like India will say you can't have a certain amount of, more than a certain amount of money abroad. So merely having this certain amount of money abroad becomes illegal in one way, and that is in one way or the other seen by a lot of people as, well, that's a financial thing. It's not so much a tax avoidance thing or a criminal thing. What has happened in the discourse over black money in India is that we have sort of narrowly focused on the money presumably made by fabulously wealthy people on criminal or other illegal activities, which is being held abroad in some sort of place that only God can imagine for the time being. We have been talking about this for so long that if anybody had this money in a Swiss account, they would have surely moved it to some other kind of account by now. And in the process, we are sort of grappling with a beast that we can't even tackle properly, because now the Supreme Court thinks that it should do the executive's job of going after this money. And in the process, we don't really have a good canvas. What I would recommend, therefore, is that we separate two or three things. One, go after money that is illegally held abroad after identifying how much of it is done in the name of financial convenience or in the name of financial preference of institutions that are operating legally in India, and how much of it is genuinely money that is hidden from the government in some way. Second, this thing can only be fixed at a macro level if ordinary people in their day-to-day transactions believe that they have some role to play in maintaining an honest economy. If you are able to go to a shop and buy something without a receipt on a day-to-day basis in every nook and corner of India, clearly people's everyday perception of what is black money is largely shaped by thinking that other people indulge in activities that generate black money, but when I do it, it's just it's just convenient to everybody. It's not black money. It's not strictly black. It's closer to white than black. It's maybe a little bit of gray and all of those kinds of things. So unless we push for a popular culture of compliance with tax law and push for institutions to operate in a way that they naturally comply with those laws, we'll not be able to separate what we really mean by black money in a way that everybody understands, and then the political leadership can act on.
Thank you, Ashwin. Surendraji, you come from a background of being in shipping industry and working through global business transactions across countries, all the way from North Sea to Andaman and all of that. Why is there incentive for perfectly legal companies and otherwise honorable institutions to engage in black money? Where do they find the need to get into all of this, and how can we stop that?
Well, I think JP and Ashwin has covered two aspects, and I think let me address this issue from a different angle. There are two types of black money. One is stashed abroad, whether it is coming or not coming, that's a separate debate. Another is what is happening in India itself, which I think parallel economy he talked about. The basic incentive for entire all this black generation of black money is to meet the requirement of the system. Take an example of a real estate, for example. Now, to meet the requirement of the state in terms of handling the bureaucracy and the politicians, the builder is supposed to generate a significant amount of money to pay them off. And that then gets generated through the buyers which buy the real estate from them. And in effect, what is happening, the fully tax-paid money of a genuine buyer, the money gets converted into black money and goes into the system. So there is some kind of an incentive for everyone to generate black money and pass it on to the next man. And I think this is a vicious cycle which is ultimately ending somewhere down the line into the political system. And so the biggest incentive lies into the political system, which needs to be looked at very closely. And unless we plug that kind of demand in the political system, that incentive will continue.
Dr. JP, recently you mentioned and highlighted the whole business of land acquisition for the new capital of the state of Andhra Pradesh, and how it seems to become a real estate business rather than genuine interest in trying to build a capital. Are you hinting that there is a deep down connection between real estate and black money? And we know that every single transaction of real estate involves black money. Are you making the connection between politics and real estate and black money here? If yes, can you elaborate on that? We can't hear you. We're not able to hear.
Absolutely, Srinivas. Both Ashwin and Surendra made this point. Everybody knows that in a big city today, land values are skyrocketing. Much of it is speculative, abnormally priced, and much of it is to black economy. Now, in most states, the tax rates for property transfer vary from 7.5 or 8.5% to 11-12%. If you take the stamp duty and the registration fee. Typically, in the states of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, for instance, the bribe collected at the time of property transfer is equal to the registration fee. 1% of the value reported is the registration fee, about 7.5% is the stamp duty, and 1% is a large amount, please remember. That is a standard bribe collected. I mean, it's like almost a fee. It's universal. Now, once you have this kind of a situation where corruption in land transfers, great deal of opacity in land titles. India is one of the few countries where after paying all these taxes, after the land transfer is registered, you are still not sure of the title. And this very high taxation, therefore, driving the legitimate transactions also underground in order to avoid taxes. Because even if one of the two parties, the buyer or the seller, is willing to abide by fair practices and law, the other party in most cases would not be willing. Therefore, willy-nilly you are compelled to participate in this. Very rarely are people able to come out of it. And if you see the many things that Ashwin mentioned, as Surendra said very rightly, corruption, real estate, crime, all these things, they are linked to political economy of the country. If there is no corruption, political economy can't be sustained. If there is no corruption, much of the black money can be avoided. If you take the tax avoidance today in India, tax evasion, I would say that is not the primary mover of black money generation in India today. It was 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. There was a time when the incremental taxation rate on personal income was as high as 90% plus, up to 97%. Absurd. So you actually created a terrific incentive to create black economy. Today, our tax rates, nobody can claim are particularly bad. 30% highest tax bracket, maybe with a few of the other other cesses, it comes to 32-33%. That's by no means a terrible rate. It's a reasonable rate. Now, nobody can say it's a bad rate. Therefore, that's not the main reason. But what happens in manufacturing sector, for instance, is if the neighbor is evading tax by paying a bribe, you are no longer competitive by paying your central excise as per law. And therefore, you also have to evade in order to compete in a global market or even Indian market. And therefore, even tax evasion is increasingly a function of corruption and the political economy rather than a straightforward economic issue of avoiding taxes. So there is no way you can de-link all these issues unless you address everything. For instance, real estate, you have to bring down the taxation rates so that the market values are reflected in the official accounting practices. And therefore, black money is now driven out of the black economy and becomes part of the white economy. For instance, you have to really curb corruption so that there is no reason why people put the corruption money into real estate, or there is no reason why the corruption itself drives the real estate prices. So you have to really link everything to everything else, and ultimately you cannot ignore the larger issue of political economy, because in the last election some people came out with a reasonable number, in my opinion, of about 32,000 crores being spent in the elections in the Loksatta. And from Andhra Pradesh, the two states of Telugu speaking origin, I know with a reasonable certainty something like 8,000 crores was spent only in these two states in the election, though that includes the assembly elections also. So 32,000 crores is a reasonable number across the country. Now, most of that money is obviously black money. Most of the money is illegally spent to buy the vote and so on and so forth. And as long as that incentive remains, there is no way black economy can be curbed. There is no way you'll be successful in actually making everything transparent. So you have to really have an all-round assault on a variety of these things. Again, to give another number, a realistic estimate of the black economy in India is about 20% of the GDP. Some people talk as high as 50%. I think these are overestimates. But about 20% is the realistic number. And again, another reasonable estimate is about 3 to 4% of the GDP is transferred out of the country as money stashed away abroad. So while this number appears to be small, 3%, please remember this is 3% of the total GDP. Therefore, as a percentage of the national savings, it is probably 10 to 12%. It's a very substantial sum. And if that money is available in the country, probably we won't have any current account deficit in the country. And probably we can actually pay back all the foreign debt. So it's a very substantial sum. You can actually have a significant amount of money available to invest in infrastructure, etc. So these monies are very, very big. Though India is not the biggest generator of black money, China has that dubious distinction. Russia is the second biggest. India ranks with Malaysia and probably Philippines and Indonesia at the third, fourth, fifth ranks in that ranking. But the sums are pretty big for India's economy.
Yes. Yeah, what's happening with real estate and black money?
See, this is a good place to talk about solutions also. Everybody knows that there's black money in the real estate economy. But how is there black money in it, and therefore how can you tackle it? I mean, Loksatta's position has always been that individuals should be free to do things that are perfectly legal, and states should not have necessarily rights to do things that cannot be done by individuals if those things are legal to begin with. Today you have a reality in which if you hang on to agricultural land, that agricultural land in many states cannot be converted into profitable residential or commercial use. But the state can forcibly acquire that land from you at less than the market value, convert it into commercial or residential use, and give it to people who are not farmers to begin with. We've created a system throughout the political economy in which the politicians first prohibit or restrict ordinary people from doing things that are permitted to be done by the state. And in the process, this creates an artificial lowering of the supply of goods and services that people want. This is one kind of problem. By and large, we must not restrict the supply of goods and services in a way that creates incentive for people to substitute legal goods and services with illegal goods and services. This is number one. Second, we must understand this whole premise of value-added taxation properly throughout the economy. If I sell my house to you, you will be forced to pay stamp duty on the entire value of the transaction, notwithstanding the fact that I have paid stamp duty on an earlier sub-portion of the transaction when I bought the house. why can't we apply simple notions like value-added taxation to say only the differential amount between the previous sale and the next sale is subject to value-added taxation? There are very simple, logical, open economy steps that can be taken to reduce the amount of black money that is created and to allow citizens to do some things legally without saying citizens can't do it legally, but the state can do it illegally. And therefore, what happens when the state can do something legally that citizens are unallowed to do, politicians come into the picture because they represent the state. And this, this nice conversion of an illegal private behavior to a legal state behavior provides the arbitrage for politicians to do.
Surendra, if you had a magic wand and you can clean up real estate like that, what are the things that you would bring in?
Well, nobody has a magic wand, and nobody should claim that nobody should be in an illusion that there is a magic wand. But of course, there are very strategic systemic reforms required in the land deals. Land reforms are one of the topmost agenda should be of the government. The government should look at real estate into a more closely, and I think real estate is not in the right now in the focus of the government at all, because it is actually the source of funding for their elections and political parties. So this is the last area which I think unless they are forced to do it will happen, and that is where the challenge is before Modi government, that how they look at this area for reforms. But I am very sure that a large sum, maybe 1/3 or something more than that, money is getting generated out of black money is getting generated out of the real estate business. Therefore, the major solution, of course, you have to go after the money which is lying outside India, but the major solution lies within India. And I think BJP government should be challenged on this, that what are you doing for that?
Right, so while we are trying to do lots of Swachh Bharat and so many other initiatives, this is an area that the government doesn't yet seem to be focused on, and rightly so. We are now joined by Narayan. Narayan is from Chennai, and he has a question. Go ahead, Narayan.
Thank you, Srinivas. My question is, almost all the opposition parties, even when BJP was in opposition, wanted the list with foreign accounts to be revealed. Even now, he is asking the same. Hello?
Right now, in the focus of the government.
Narayan, maybe you should turn.
So this is the last area which I think unless they are forced to it will happen.
Can you turn off your
the challenges before Modi government that is area for reforms. But I am very sure that a large sum, maybe 1/3 or something more than that, money is getting.
Okay, let me continue the question until Narayanan is back. Dr. JB, all the opposition parties, even BJP, when was opposition, wanted the list with foreign accounts to be revealed. Even the Supreme Court seemed asking the same, but didn't make it public. Should this list be made public?
Yeah, and I think BJP got to do.
Srinivas, this is one of the problems of Indian political discourse. In opposition, you are reckless. In government, you collude. Both are dangerous. The recklessness in opposition and collusion in government, both are dangerous. The truth is somewhere in between. The truth is, India still is a relatively weak country in the world economy. And therefore, the rest of the world is not going to oblige you no matter what our self-image is. Unless you create conditions where you get more and more information and cooperation of the bankers all over the world and the foreign governments, more than governments actually, it's the bankers, you have a problem. It is not merely double taxation avoidance agreement, because oftentimes the double taxation issue is about the accounted incomes, which is the white money earned abroad or in the country of residence. So how to avoid the double taxation? But the real issue is to unearth these this information, how do you get it? For instance, the 627 accounts, how did we get? Courtesy the German government or the French government. If those governments did not oblige us, and if our government was not compelled to take this information despite its own inclination to sort of keep it secret, because of public pressure, ultimately the government was compelled to take the information. Otherwise, when the German and French governments are offering information, our government declined to take it for obvious reasons. So otherwise we would not have got the information, because we have no capacity on our own to get the information out. Now what we got is only a minuscule percentage of the total information that we require in order to unearth it and then have a strategy to bring at least some of it back and to really have a mechanism to stop outflow in future. And therefore now if we aggressively make it public without creating the legal instruments to justify such publicity, I think we'll be shooting ourselves in the foot, and therefore Arun Jaitley's point is valid. But because politicians are completely mistrusted in India, anybody who says, look, let us do our due diligence, let us do a thorough job of investigation, and let us not hurt the investigative process as well as further revelations, people no longer trust it. And that's why Supreme Court also, while it acted with bravado initially, once the list was available to it, the court refused to open the sealed cover and simply passed it on to the special investigation team. There is no other option at this point of time. The second thing is, we must be very pragmatic in getting money back. If the money stashed away is merely money avoiding taxes and there is no other crime involved, then prudence demands that we actually have a voluntary disclosure scheme and collect the taxes and impose some small penalty and make sure that the money comes back to India. But with the fear that if they still keep some money abroad, or if they indulge in a similar thing in future, there will be much bigger penalties and criminal prosecution. That means we must strengthen rule of law and there must be credibility of the government. Right now the credibility generally in India is pretty low. This government must establish that credibility and get back as much money as possible, because our capacity to get back the money is not that strong. We must understand that. It's not that you give an order and the rest of the world will obey. And the third thing is, as you pointed out, more money is flowing out increasingly, incrementally. And therefore, much more than the money stashed away abroad, the money flowing out of the country today is more important. Therefore, we must again take a very sensible approach and see that future outflow should be prevented as much as possible. Because India is a growing economy. We are only at a level of 100. We hope to be at a level of 1,000, 10 times our economy in the next 20 years or so. And if that is the case, we have an obligation to see that further outflows actually are prevented, because that's going to be a much bigger amount. 10 years later, our successors are going to sit and discuss not $500 billion, but maybe about $2 or $3 trillion. Therefore, preventing outflows is much more important than being obsessed with the money already that has gone out. So I think unless we take a pragmatic view, a sensible view of getting back the money, preventing further flows, and really prosecuting the offenders in terms of crime or corruption, but not paint everybody with a black brush. Have a sensible approach, only then can nations be protected. But that requires a very mature, very wise public discourse, not too much of bluster and bluff.
Yes. Ashwin, did you want to chime in on this?
Well, there are two kinds of countries in the world when it comes to this problem. There are countries with real economies with substantial goods and services that are being bought and sold. And then there are countries that are very small with a very minor economic footprint, but would like to cash in on the fact that there are other countries that have big economies. So the problem comes about because a country like Mauritius or a country like any other island countries that have become notorious for these sorts of things recognizes that if it sets itself up in the international trade environment in such a way that is tax advantageous for companies, then it can route a whole bunch of money through its economy and collect a small fee in the process for keeping its economy reasonably strong. Now this problem is what is leading to having 41% of our trade with Mauritius or 41% of our global foreign investment from Mauritius. And this cannot be fixed without entering into dialogue with other large economies and coming up with a consensual way of saying we have to prevent small economies from gerrymandering the system in such a way that without a significant trading base of their own, they leverage the actual economies of large countries to create incentives for companies to go into those institutions instead. And this is, we've seen this in every industry. We see this in telecom, we've seen this in shipping, we've seen this in banking services, we've seen this in every kind of industry around the world. So there is an international effort required to address the specific behavior of small economies which act in this arbitrage capacity between large economies that could otherwise be trading directly with each other.
We go to the next question from Tara Krishnaswamy in Bangalore. Tara?
The question I have for the panel is, countries like the US, maybe 4 or 5 decades back, they got rid of higher valued currency denominations in an effort to tighten this parallel economy, if you will, right? So you don't have anything more than $100 bills in the US. But then we have almost all of the US citizens having access to bank accounts and now credit cards. How do you think this will work in India? Will it work in a country where we have very small penetration of bank accounts and nearly no credit card use in the grand scheme of things? How does one make something like this work? Going to the point that you made about reducing the continued generation and outflow of black money is more important than to prioritize than bringing in the existing black money.
Surendra, would you like to go first on this one?
Yeah, I think apart from what money is flowing out that is one part of the problem. But what is actually going unnoticed within the country and hoarded in many ways within the country is also a very large sum. And maybe my sense is that is a bigger money than what is going out. So I think very, very small steps could really help India to recover that money and bring back that money into the system. And of course, what Tara mentioned is a way forward, because government needs to focus on strengthening the banking system. Majority of the population must come into the banking system, and I think gradually we must move into over a period of time into a system where everyone is linked to a banking system, and so we can reduce the money supply in cash, and that also reduces the cost of managing the money supply. So I think that's a very right direction government has to take into account, and you can't suddenly give up 1,000 rupees notes or 500 rupees notes, but over a period of time, it must be done. The focus should be there, and it should be a time-bound program. And it's a good thing to notice that this Pradhan Mantri's Jan Dhan Yojana is trying to bring more and more people into the banking system, and I think that kind of programs may help us to reach that level where we can get away with get rid of big notes. Apart from that, I think there are small other suggestions. If we are not running out of time, I'll take 2 minutes. Like, for example, there are a lot of
Okay, looks like we've got a drop from his line. Ashwin, you want to pick that up about the currency bills, the large currency bills? Should India adopt a policy like that? Line is muted. Vamsi, I think all lines are muted.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead. Please.
Yeah, okay. So, like I was saying, for example, today we have a situation in which local communities have no sort of direct interest in knowing what is the due tax revenue to their local area, because they don't benefit directly from that money in a way that they can understand and then use in a way that they want to. So the more local taxation components are introduced and more local monitoring of that is introduced, then you will have an incentive for every ward, every city to say this is the money that is going to me, and I can go after it in a way that genuinely brings the revenues that I need to manage myself. We have an over-centralized system in which the central government and the state government are carrying out most of the expenditure, and therefore the benefit of good public expenditure, good public money that is fully accrued in taxation is not available. So this is, I would say, we must look for ways in which people become alert to and aware of what they lose when tax revenues are not fully paid. That is a strong incentive.
Ashwin, we have some difficulty with your audio, so it could be a hangout thing. Just give us a second. Can you guys hear me okay? Let's go to Dr. JP. Maybe your line is fine with audio, sir. This topic is about the eliminating the large bills like 500 rupees and 1,000 rupees and what effect it will have on black money.
As a principle, Tara is right. We have to look at demonetization and smaller currencies and plastic money increasingly rather than cash transactions. But we must not be over-optimistic about our capacity to implement that in the short term. My sense is it will take another 20 years. I'll tell you why. As Surendra said, when 40% of the people don't even have a bank account, they don't know how to manage a check or a credit card. When even people like me don't know how to handle a credit card, trust me, rarely do I use a credit card. Only when I go to Delhi or some other place where I pay the India International Center bill or something else. Otherwise, we are still long distance away in terms of a culture as well as the banking, the whole participation in the banking activities, financial inclusion, and in terms of the knowledge base. The second is, as long as buying a home is a legitimate aspiration of most middle class people, and as long as land and home buying, home purchase are all completely enmeshed in black money, there is no way you're going to be able to take away black money. Therefore, what we discussed earlier, Ashwin talked about it and Surendra talked about it, make taxation more sensible in purchases, guarantee titles after you have paid the tax, and remove the government's capacity to indulge in patronage in relation to land. That means transfer land for private commercial purposes, no matter on what pretext. Take away that power. The only power should be zoning power. Unless all these things are perfectly in place, the middle classes will not have confidence in the government, and therefore, no matter what you do, there will be greater black money in some form or the other, but you will only further criminalize it. That's not a very wise thing. You will only bring middlemen into it by hawala and other means. Without a currency note, they probably have some cheats which are equivalent to currency. In effect, private currency will now be in operation. The second thing is, there are two kinds of black money, crudely speaking. The big black money, the small black money. The big one, they know how to handle it, no matter what is the denomination of the currency, it doesn't matter, because for them 1,000 rupees is incredibly small. They deal with crores and hundreds of crores. Therefore, they found mechanisms to deal with that independent of the currency denomination. It's the small black money that really is worried about the currency denomination. What are the problems of small black money apart from the home purchase? Day-to-day corruption, the petty corruption. You have to pay 100 rupees or 200 rupees to get a small service. Unless that corruption is minimized or eliminated, you are compelling them to pay post-tax money for corruption as a bribe to get a small service, and that certainly will be resented. The other thing is willingness to pay taxes, and that's where Ashwin's point is very vital. Most Indians hate to pay taxes. They pay taxes only because they cannot avoid payment of tax. That means the salaried people whose income cannot be concealed. Most others in service sector and business, they try and get away with as much of tax avoidance as possible. That has become national pastime because there's no trust in government. Now, one way of making this possible is, as Ashwin said, because you cannot restore the trust in a centralized government in the short term, it will take a long time. But if you localize the taxation and the services, and if people see where the tax money is going, there will be greater willingness to comply with the taxation. And that's one of the reasons why Loksatta is fiercely advocating local governance, because people see where the tax money is going. and better leadership will come, better taxation will happen, and better services will be delivered. But again, there's enormous reluctance in this country to decentralize. Even the current government in Delhi does not seem to be deeply committed to that. They're not talking about that. At least I haven't heard much about that. So you really have many linkages. You don't have a simple shotgun solution.
One observation I would like to make as one of the hosts of all these hangout sessions over the last several weeks is, no matter if the topic is about agriculture or education or public finances or black money, things come down right back to local governments. Everything seems to come all the way back to local governments, and how the government of India or the state government just don't care enough to empower local governments. And this seems to be an area that's either intentionally left out or completely a blind spot for all the governments. Ashwin, we lost you earlier when the audio went bad. Did you want to add anything to Dr. JP said? We didn't hear quite what you said.
I'm trying to remember what I said earlier. Let's move on. Let's not worry about it.
Move on. So speaking about local governments, I'm very excited
Yeah. So the thing that I was trying to say is that if local communities can have a way of knowing what is the tax due to them from commerce in their own neighborhood and from economic activity in their own areas, then they will acquire a greater incentive in what's going on in their area. Today, it's almost like there is a black economy. Some money is being lost to taxation, but it's somewhere in a vague manner, and nobody can tell whether it's impacting you directly in your own community, and therefore, no one knows what to do about it. But let's say that there is a portion of revenue that is available to local communities or to wards from tax collection. Then what will happen is that the communities will realize right away that we have every incentive to make sure that every shopkeeper, every house owner is paying his tax, because we get to spend that money in ways that affect our development directly. So bringing in local communities is one part of the answer.
Okay, I was trying to introduce one of our guests today. We were talking about local government, and I'm very pleased to introduce to all of you one of the young and dynamic Loksatta leader from Andhra Pradesh, from Konasima region, a little village called Yedurlanka. He is one of our members of Loksatta Party who was a professor in engineering college and contested local government polls, and now represents Yedurlanka village in the MPTC. MPTC is a Mandal Parishad Corporation, which is the third tier of governance. And since taking over as MPTC member in July, Raj Verma has been working closely with the system, with the local government, with the people, and he's been fighting corruption, various things, and he's come across black money within his short duration of being an elected representative. So I'm happy to invite Raj into this conversation. Raj, what has been your experience, and what would you like to ask our panelists today? Can we unmute Raj?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Yeah, good evening to one and all. I'm Raj Verma from Yedurlanka village, which is part of Aipalvara Mandal in East Godavari. I have been a member from since 2008 in Loksatta Party, and I'm happy that I got elected last time in the MPTC elections, though as an independent. For various reasons, I had to contest as an independent. So, but now, I mean, we're doing things under the flag of Loksatta as usual, so there's not a problem now. The first incident that we encountered, like the black money, as we were discussing, so it's just part of the rural economy. I mean, the people who are losing money in the form of as you said, the taxes, and in the rural economy where a lot of money is not accounted for. So most of the money that is generated among the not it is not accounted for. Taxation to the aquaculture, they're having huge amounts of money that is being linked around the foreign trade as well, because most of the exports that they do in the aquaculture is going out, but the income that they're getting in, so that
Okay, I think the broadband connection in Sri Lanka might not be quite helping us here. So,
Let
Dr.
me
J, you got a
just
question?
briefly intervene for a second, Srinivas.
Yes, please.
Now, Sri Lanka is a good example of how black money is generated. Sri Lanka is opposite Yanam, which is part of Pondicherry state, but an enclave in current Andhra Pradesh, East Godavari district. Until the new bridge is built across Godavari River by ONGC, there used to be a ferry operating in Godavari River. When prohibition was in operation,
exactly
the local bootleggers, they bid an abnormal amount to run the ferry. Not because there was income on the ferrying, but because they could do bootlegging and smuggling of liquor because of prohibition law, using this ferrying activity as an opportunity. Now, by definition, all that income has to be black money. So, the way you structure the laws and policies, the way the corruption goes unchecked, if you don't really address these issues, there's no way you can address black money. Yanam Sri Lanka, while it appears to be a small village, there's a lot of history behind that, and that is now in the main on that bridge across the Godavari River, and that's a good example of how enormous amount of black money is generated. And Raj talked about, for instance, the trade in agriculture, in shrimp culture, where a lot of shrimp is exported. That's of course a classic case of under-invoicing exports, etc. So you have any number of things which are happening. Unless they're all addressed systematically, instead of merely treating everything as a criminal activity, you cannot really answer the problem of that.
Srinivas, can I add something?
Yes, sir. Would you please tilt your screen? We can't really see you.
Can you see now?
Much better. Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I lost something in between for a little while. I think there was a talk about honesty towards tax compliance. As a taxpayer, what is my expectation? Why I should pay tax, and when I will become honest to pay tax? Well, frankly speaking, I think I need to get something in return. I must see something getting in return for my tax compliance. And that kind of faith or that kind of linkage I don't see. And even if I pay my taxes honestly, on a day-to-day basis, I struggle to see where my money is going and am I getting anything in return. So I think whereas on one side we are expecting taxpayer to be honest in compliance, but we are not expecting the government or the system to provide the services, the linkage will not take place. You can't expect honesty from one side. So I think we have to directly connect these two things together. Of course, local government empowerment and improving the local quality of life through local government is one of the tasks, but a whole lot of systemic reforms are required to connect these two things. Apart from that, basically, I think what is happening is in India, if you ask the common man, the convenience of living in India is towards dishonesty. If you live honestly, I think you have to struggle every day. And I don't think 90% or 99% population can be expected to struggle every day and remain honest. By nature of its environment, we are producing dishonest citizens. And I think there is no fault of citizens alone. So I think there are, and every dishonesty is directly linked to creating parallel economy. So I think we have Loksatta has repeatedly come out with a set of reforms in every area, and I think we are lucky to have Dr. JP, who was part of the Second Administrative Reform Commission, which has looked at the whole lot of set of reforms in the entire administrative system, in the entire political system. I think some
Okay, that seems to be another process there. Mahesh, you picked up one of the questions that's got a lot of votes on the poll. So, would you like to bring that question to this panel?
Yeah.
Dr. GB, the question is, most of the laws enacted for prevention and elimination of black money seem to achieve the goal by inducing fear of law. Are there any incentive mechanisms which would be employed to achieve the same?
I agree with you. But unless the black money is generated by criminal activity, corruption or crime, if it's merely tax evasion, then I think there is no substitute to incentives. The world over, they are doing that. If United States, which is a very tough country in terms of tax regulation, IRS has enormous powers. They put away very powerful people in jail because they avoided taxes, etc. Even they felt compelled to go in for a voluntary disclosure scheme, and they gave an amnesty. So there's no choice. If you're really pragmatic, taking a very rigid line will not help us. We have to create incentives. We have to have a voluntary disclosure scheme. We have to have a system where tax compliance becomes more and more easy. We have to reduce the taxation in real estate transactions so that the tax I pay is not increased, perhaps even reduced, and yet I can disclose a higher purchase value, the real purchase value. So unless these incentives are there, merely cracking the whip and saying you pay taxes or else, you disclose or else, will not help. Now, we had all these kinds of laws earlier. As I said, there was a time when we had an incremental income tax rate of about 97%. Now, you would be insane to pay taxes at that rate. You have to really avoid taxes, and that's what people did. So you really have to have compliance by willing consent, not merely by force. Force is the last resort. No government can survive by using force alone. That becomes tyranny. You have to create conditions where people feel good about uh, obeying the law, and people feel it's easy to obey the law. And one aside, Srinivas, the unintended consequence of this black money in real estate is our banks are relatively safe. You know, the whole global banking crisis, starting with the United States, that happened because the indiscriminate lending practices, particularly for home purchases, and as the home prices crashed, as the supply outstripped demand, suddenly their local crisis became a global crisis. In India, that does not happen in the current dispensation because the market value, the real market value is always much higher than the official market value, and therefore the properties pledged, they're always pledged at a lower rate, and therefore the banks are relatively safe. Otherwise, our NPA rate and default level would have been phenomenal. So when you now curb black money, you must also make sure that the banks adjust these credit mechanisms. That means if 100 rupees value today becomes 200 rupees value, if banks then start lending at 170 or 180 rupees, we're in trouble, because once the real estate bubble crashes, the banking system will collapse. So unless all these adjustments are made very carefully, we don't really have safeguards. And therefore policymakers must be extraordinarily wise and farsighted.
Interesting. Unintended consequence of black money indeed. Ashwin, did you want to comment on this?
I'm having a little trouble, Srinu. Can you hear me clearly?
We can hear you, yes. No video, but we can hear you.
Yeah, that's worth talking about is whether we have the manpower necessary to engage with international systems of law and policy that impact this issue, and therefore we are able to pursue the matter in a way that works with other countries also to achieve outcomes that we care about in India.
I think Srinivas is an extremely valid point. Even if everything else is equal, we simply don't have the professional capacity. We don't have forensic accounting ability yet. Our CBI is very small. We only have about 2,000 functioning investigators in a CBI. All this talk, we have a maximum of 6,000 employees of CBI. Most of them are for support services. The actual investigators don't exceed 2,000. From large crimes to big frauds, they are the only agency for everything. There simply is no way they can do it. One case like Jagan's case alone would probably tie up 100, 200 members of the CBI for years together. And we don't have the capacity, the personnel, as well as the technology and the skill and the training. We can't do it overnight. We have to systematically do it over a period of time. And we have to also have to improve the legal framework, strengthen the capacity to enforce rule of law. Unless all these things are done very well over a period of time, much of it is hot air and talk. Because even countries like the United States, which are probably best equipped to deal with these things, they find it extremely hard. Though they are the ones who actually created this problem. Initially, within the US, they created Delaware as a tax haven. And then later on, many countries started giving them the same benefit. Similarly, Britain made London itself a great tax haven because they got a lot of investment from the rest of the world, which is unaccounted. They were very happy. And subsequently, Virgin Islands and other tax havens, British controlled, came into being. Now this spread throughout the world, and US and Britain themselves are now hurt, and therefore they are not taking it seriously. In some senses, therefore, the climate is conducive for us. But unless we have the professional capability to take advantage of this, not only the integrity and the political will, but also the professional capability and skill, and the size of the organizations in terms of manpower, be able to, or human power, to be able to handle the problem. We will simply be talking a lot about it. Therefore, enormous amount of quiet, effective, skill-based work is required for India to really take advantage of the global climate.
Yes, Ashwin.
Ashwin, can I say something here?
Yes, sure, definitely.
Yeah, one other thing that has helped in other countries is that they have separated the institutions that keep a check on how well the taxation system functions from the tax department itself or from the government and parliament alone. For example, there are institutions that sort of report on the fairness of taxation in some countries, institutions that report on budgetary allocations and their successes in achieving goals in some countries, and these are invariably funded by the parliaments of those countries. In India, we sort of don't have this separate space in which Parliament funds some institutions to keep checks and balances on how the executive achieves certain aspects of its goals. And it would be good to have institutions that are independently funded to achieve those outcomes as well.
Okay, we have a couple more questions before we end today's session, but can you bring up the slide, Vamsi? One of the things that we've been doing in these hangout sessions based on popular demand, I must say, is that several of you are interested in working with Loksatta Party and understanding these issues more at a more detailed level, trying to research them and trying to find solutions that can be implemented using our policy interventions or working with legislators. So like the other groups that we have are on agriculture and education, where there are hundreds of folks that are working with Loksatta people to collaborate on ideas and work on solutions. For the public finance, this is a second session we are having on finance related matters. The earlier session was about budget and public finance. So we have a group that is already functioning. If you can put up the URL, Vamsi, that is bit.ly LSP Public Finance. If you want to join the group, the research group that want to work on this area, I encourage those of you watching this video to go to this URL, bit.ly/LSP Public Finance. A Loksatta executive member and the convener of our Delhi unit, Achutam Kalani, he will get in touch with you and you can join the group and take this book forward. With that, I will ask Tara to ask the next question.
Yeah, thanks, Srinivas. My next question is regarding what we are doing. What, if anything, we can do bottom up to contain and regulate the creation of an appearance and trade in black money. So the notion of the broken window, if you will. Not everybody wakes up one morning with thousands of crores of black money. There are a lot of everyday people as we go to our neighborhood kiranas, as we go to our neighborhood doctors or lawyers. We pay the fee or we buy a product, and oftentimes even in a pharmacy you won't get a bill. While we ourselves may not be dishonest in trying to evade tax or not pay the full amount, we may not want to go all the way and fight this. And even if we want to, we don't know what to do about it. Just because my store or my pharmacy doesn't give me a bill, I don't want to run from pillar to post. Is there a simple way where we can shame the small creations of black money, small instances where black money gets created and used and encouraged, and therefore, prevent it from becoming a monster?
Ashwin, would you like to go first on this?
It's difficult because you reach a stage where so large percentage of the population is incentivized to evade taxation and reporting of the formal economy. You sort of reach a stage where going back from this itself becomes a challenge. The only thing that I would rely on as a principle is to say that we must operate from the notion that people should be, as far as possible, free to do things, but controls only regulate the health of what they are doing. But we have to come from a liberal perspective where we trust the people more and put in place the verification systems needed to achieve compliance with law.
Looks like we are losing your audio again, Ashwin. Give us a second. Dr. JB, would you like to take over? It's about small corruption.
No, many of the answers are self-evident. They stem from the discussion that we've had. The first is, at least at a personal level, all of us indulge in tax payment and insist on receipts. And the climate actually is getting better. I'm an optimist there. Things are not really as bad as they appear, really. Because in terms of tax compliance, India is getting better. Tax rates are getting better. And the tax methodology is getting better. For instance, the old commercial tax is now replaced by VAT. VAT basically means even if you think that you are cheated, actually nowadays it's very difficult for a seller of a commodity to avoid the tax. At some level or the other, at the manufacturer's level to the retail trader's level, there are many tiers. You will be caught. That's the purpose of VAT. Therefore, increasingly we become more tax compliant. With GST, it will be even more tax compliant. Therefore, we must avail this opportunity and make sure that there is an insistence on tax payment and receipts. The second is real estate. The other day when in Bangalore, all of us were discussing, you, Tara and I and others, you were talking about certain real estate companies coming up now for a small fee of 1 or 2%. They are all offering clean white transactions. Therefore, increasingly popularize this. And at least if some people start doing it, others will be shamed into doing that. And the third is, to the extent that we can, this whole menace of corruption. Stay away from that and then try and see what best we can do to curb corruption. We all know what needs to be done at individual level and organizational level. Then again, it came up today, non-cash transactions, promote at a personal level and at community level non-cash transactions. And finally, increasingly fight for and insist upon local taxation rather than central taxation so that more and more people will comply with the taxes. Once it's in the tax net, that's by definition not black money. So I think the answers at the small level, they're there. But simultaneously, the big things also should be fought for, and we have to look at innovative solutions. As I said, I don't believe that things are really terrible. They're getting better, not worse. Though, as the economy is growing pretty rapidly, the quantums appear to be humongous. But it's not that we are really terrible yet. We can curb it if we do the right things, and I think there is some amount of public pressure today and judicial pressure, perhaps even political will, because there are some clean people in government who want to come to grips with this problem. Therefore, by a judicious combination of all these efforts, I think we can bring this beast under control. It's not something beyond control.
So I will ask the last question, and Ashwin, if you had something else to add to that, you could respond to that as well. But this question is about the legislators that we have today, and they themselves being a product or a part of the whole black money election corruption cycle. So therefore, how can we expect our lawmakers to draft stricter laws to prevent further black money from being generated or incentives being created to eliminate black money? So this is the same old question that we have about how can we give the keys to somebody who have no incentive in making it happen. So Ashwin?
No class is uniformly bad or uniformly good. At some level, we have to work with the system, work with the few people who are willing to push for these kinds of and assist them in creating these outcomes. It's not going to be easy. Any country with 65 years of accumulated deficits like we have now cannot realistically expect that its problems are going to be solved overnight, or that its problems are going to be solved without a significant struggle. We can only expect that if we encourage and allow and facilitate more people to participate in this transformation of the country, it will happen that much faster. And therefore, the only real answer is to say that participate more in public life, participate more in politics, and as a result of that, the quality of the legislators will also be what we want it to be. And that is a transformational process in which we have to invest considerable amounts of time. For the moment, the only alternative is to work with those who are inclined to move in this direction, who are already in the system, few as they may be, and see what we can achieve through our engagement with them.
Thank you, Ashwin. Dr. JP?
There are only two practical approaches. Let's be logical. The first is what happened to Ms. Jayalalitha. Not only a conviction and therefore jail term, but and disqualification, but a significant, though not substantial by her standards perhaps, a significant monetary penalty. Unless hundreds of politicians and public servants, not only politicians, bureaucrats themselves, there are many bureaucrats who made money by the ton. Let's not think it's corruption or black money is a prerogative of only politicians. Unless a significant number of them suffer very severe penalties, and therefore there is fear, the incentives are altered, the pain is very substantial and very real. Unless that condition is created, that means you really create an environment where rule of law is real, substantive. It's a tall order, but there is no substitute. Then many politicians will realize it's not worthwhile. With public pressure, with greater urbanization, with greater incomes, with judicial activity, and this, I think it will probably change the way politics is perceived by many people. The second is obviously electability. If increasing number of voters take money and vote, and without taking money they refuse to vote, and therefore electoral fortunes depend on black money, then it is utterly stupid on our part to expect that black money will disappear from the political activity or from the national economic sphere. And therefore, a greater democratization of our polity so that people realize that the election is really about their lives, is not a purchasable commodity. Vote is not a purchasable commodity. B, create an electoral system where the decent people by decent means actually become electable. If we are truthful, we all realize that they are in a large measure, in most cases, incredibly unelectable. A Rajwama getting elected in a Mandal Parishad, or one or two truly decent people getting elected to Lok Sabha or state assemblies is not really enough. We have to create a culture where decent people can get elected by the people to office. And right now we don't have that electoral reform of that kind and the political culture itself. Now, unless we address these things systematically, I don't think our political system can on its own suddenly get an epiphanic moment, and say, let us stop all black men. They cannot, because they are enmeshed in that. Every MLA knows that if you talk to them about all these things, they'll laugh at you. Privately, they all agree with you, but they'll laugh at you because they know the realities of political life, and they think, and quite rightly, we are all hypocritical, and we are talking to our hats. So unless we really do some of these things, I don't think that the political system can afford to address the issue of black men.
Can I say one thing there, Surendra? At a tactical level, there is one thing that we can do. We can push the politicians, whoever they are today, to increase the supply of goods and services that the people want. And properly doing that will itself have some technical effect on the extent of corruption that is out there. Today what is happening is that politicians deliberately limit the supply of goods and services in certain areas to create corruption. We see this in land, we see this in education, we see this in healthcare, we see this in many arenas where there's a wide demand from the people, but the supply is simply not available because the rules for supplying them at market rates and at market practices are simply so draconian and over-regulatory that people don't come forward to supply these in sufficient measure, or the laws forbid it. I think at a practical level, it is possible to push politicians to increase the supply of goods and services. And that is something that they don't necessarily resist in the same way that they resist conversations about changing corruption.
Dr. JP, do you want to say anything about that? Increasing supply and goods?
I agree. There are two ways. One is supply side, the other demand side. Supply side is beginning to happen already. The whole economic liberalization is that. But the problem with that approach is the limitation. It's a vital approach, but it has limitation because whoever thought that 2G spectrum or any kind of spectrum allocations and therefore big money was there 5-10 years ago, we did not know. We only knew that telephone service was an issue. There's a lot of corruption there. But if the demand side also is not simultaneously addressed, they'll find new avenues, because once you have power, what is power? Power is the ability to compel the people to do something they may or may not want to do. And if that power is channelized wrongly, there will always be corruption. And as long as the demand side is not adequately addressed, while supply side is important, definitely it's an important thing, but that must be also combined with the demand side addressing. Both are necessary, I entirely agree.
Thank you. Before I want to close, I wanted to ask Raj Verma, since we lost you earlier, did you wanted to ask another question or complete your earlier question, Raj? Go ahead.
I have a question as well as a kind of doubt. So, I mean, we're talking about the black money in various sectors. So, I just have a suggestion that why can't we make transactions out in terms of cash when it's black to illegal? These like other means in terms of because of metals. Make these most necessary gets that could help. And other thing is, why can't we start as a the Loksatta Party? Why can't we start a white money movement, which makes or which requests the people to have a PAN card, like
Okay, so the audio was a little sketchy, but Dr. JP, what is talking about is the same thing that I believe Tara has brought up earlier, similar thing, and also about why can't Loksatta Party start white money movement, maybe Safed Bharat?
No, as we discussed earlier when Tara raised the issue, we should move in that direction, but as I said, I think we are 20 years away. We must make a beginning now. It will take 15-20 years because there is no financial inclusion, the culture of the plastic money or the technology or the people's familiarity has not come about. But certainly, Loksatta, all of us can play a role in mobilizing public opinion. Let's all take a call and do it in an innovative manner if it works. The only thing is we must do it in an innovative manner, an intelligent manner to have an impact. Otherwise, it will be many of the pious proclamations, and if we take up too many things without sufficient impact, that may also undermine our credibility. Therefore, let's take a call together. It's definitely worthy of consideration.
Thank you, Dr. JP, and thank you everyone who joined us from Mumbai, Chennai, and Bengaluru, and from Lanka. Thank you all of you watching it from all over the world. We appreciate your patience with the delay at the beginning of this program tonight. As always, you can join us in these hangout sessions on future topics, and if you want to be part of ongoing discussion and a more private conversations about these topics, please sign up on this URL bit.ly LSP Public Finance. If you can go there and enter your email and name, Loksatta folks will get in touch with you. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good night. Bye now.